Today's episode is brought to you by How's It Brewing. Located less than 1 mile from the surf in Honolulu, Hawaii, How's It was founded by true craft beer enthusiasts inspired by island flavors and palates. Melding that with the best of the Pacific Northwest and global styles and traditions, How's It Brewing specializes in high-quality, on-site brewed beers available for both wholesale and retail. So whether you're a bar owner, a serious beer lover, or just hop curious, they've got something for you. Stop by their tasting room and enjoy a wide range of carefully crafted beers, pre-packaged options for the non-beer drinkers in your crew, and a rotating lineup of local food trucks that'll keep your taste buds just as happy as your pint glass. The game's probably on one of their TVs, and you may even run into a local shaper to talk about that new board you've been wanting. That's How's It Brewing, 330 Kamani Street, Honolulu. Good vibes, great beer, and always something new on tap. Tell them Billy Jack sent you. Hello and welcome back to the Surfer's Library, proudly presented by Hillsborough Surf Club. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legends. Today we're going to continue reading Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel, by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen Jost. Last episode, we read chapters 1 through 3, so if you haven't had a chance yet, make sure you go back and check those out. This book is available on Amazon.com and at EndlessDreamsPublishing.com. Chapter 4. Going Way Back. I knew Bruce even before Surfing Holidays debuted in 1961. Back then, Bruce Brown wasn't known so much for his surfing, but as a filmmaker of surf flicks that were featured in local school auditoriums. About the second year of my career, I had the opportunity to meet Bruce and his beautiful wife, Pat. Bruce had a clever, humorous, and ingenious wit, and we always got along well. His wife, Pat, will always be one of my favorites. Smart, funny, she was a darling, dark-haired woman, beautiful inside and out. There was basically nothing wrong with her. Even though Bruce and Pat were only about 5 years older, they kind of adopted me. I lived with the Browns and Phil Edwards for a while on the north shore of Oahu, and when we all moved back to the mainland, I shaped for Hobie at night and rented a room a mile away above Bruce's garage in Dana Point to hide from the draft. No visitors, dude. My parents didn't even know where I lived. All I did was shape, surf, and sleep. Bruce started out as a lifeguard and swept floors and glued up blanks on the side at Dale Velzy's shop in San Clemente. He showed so much potential in the beginning of his filming career that Velzy bought him a 16mm camera and put the money up for his first documentary in 1958, Slippery When Wet. Surfing Holidays, Bruce's fourth project, was groundbreaking. Before then, the surfer's character had been depicted superficially on film. Both photographers and filmmakers alike, Bruce, Grant Roloff, Bud Brown, John Severson, Leroy Granis, all converged on the north shore of Oahu from October through March. Considered one of, if not the best place in the entire world to surf in the winter, they all showed up to shoot the upcoming talent. Bruce took a new tactic in Surfing Holidays. It was the first attempt ever by a serious filmmaker to recognize the surfer as a person, someone with a lifestyle. Surfers also had been unpaid up to that point, and Bruce knew that changes were way overdue when it came to their paychecks. So he thought up a different approach. Make a movie about one surfer, Phil Edwards. Phil Edwards was this wily, offbeat blonde kid who surfed Oceanside, rode a balsa board named Babes, and wore cut-off Levi's. It's funny. Nowadays, surfing's all about competition. But back then, Phil was number one in the world and he never actually won a contest. In the late 50s, it was my quest to meet Phil. Just like golf, getting to know the pros is how you learn. I heard Phil didn't warm up to people easily, though. He was a standoff individual. So I showed up wherever he did. When I finally did get to know him, the rumor of his aloofness was understandable. Phil is a living genius when it comes to the ocean. His mind and creativity are way beyond waves breaking on the beach, and his casual style and grace out in the water are part of his love for and consciousness of the ocean. I remember one morning back in 1961 when Phil, Mike Diffenderfer, Bruce, and I were checking the surf out at Sunset Beach. There were only a few breaks worth riding that day, starting from Haleiwa to Velzyland, but everyone was hanging out at sunset, One of my favorite breaks before the crowds came and invaded the place. My last refuge on the North Shore. To avoid the masses, the four of us hopped in the car in search of a secret spot. Jose Angel said Bonsai Pipeline was good. Jose was a small Latino schoolteacher who taught at Haleiwa Elementary School and was a wonderful person. But there was another side to the quiet scholar. For some reason, the guy loved wiping out. Never could figure out that one. Jose lived right in front of pipelines, so he knew when it was good and when it wasn't. He watched it break firsthand, plus he dove all over the island. He knew the waters of Hawaii like the back of his hand. We walked down to the water's edge and Jose was right. It looked rideable. Diff didn't want anything to do with pipeline. He thought it was too dangerous. Even Phil hesitated. Everyone on the North Shore was aware of the jagged coral shooting up from the reef, not to mention the shallow water. The real story was the caves under the reef. The possibility of being shoved into one of them was as sure as sunlight. Anyone who's ever wiped out at pipeline knows it can scare the living shit out of you. You're underwater at the bottom and you put your hands up to find your way to the surface, but bummer, there's a roof over your head. The secret is don't panic. Wait a couple of seconds. When the wave passes, it sucks you back out. It's just not something you can count on. It's better not to wipe out at all. I'll admit I was the glory hog in the group. I was driven enough to make it to the top when I figured out I might have a future in surfing. I also told myself it's okay to be number 2, as long as I knew number 1, Phil. Because he earned that spot, I gave him his due respect. Like in golf, best score shoots first. My first impression was, let's go out before the other camera junkies. Phil didn't say a word. He wasn't rushing into anything. He was more concerned he wouldn't be able to find the lineup because of the current. I coached him, don't worry, I'll be the lineup. Bruce set up, I ran down the beach and dug my heels into the sand to line Phil up with the takeoff spot as he paddled out. Reaching the outside, he took off on his first wave right in line with where I stood. I ran down the beach along the water's edge trying to keep up with Phil, who disappeared in the tube 3 times before he kicked out. Butch Van Artsdalen was the first surfer I saw come out of a tube. It was the whole kamikaze thing. For years we avoided the tube. I think it was even shunned for a while. The only good thing was that it was the safest exit out of a wave. I ran back to the lineup. Phil caught a second wave and did the exact same thing so Bruce could get prime footage. Then it was over. Phil didn't have any desire to hog the shot or waste Bruce's film. He did his job and was out. When Phil came in, I asked him how it was. He didn't say a word. He told me later on, though, that it scared the crap out of him. Surfing Holidays featured Phil in Florida, California, and Hawaii. Bruce also filmed Kemp Aberg, Mickey Dora, Mike Haley, and myself riding Sunset, and 12-year-old Peter Johnson, a Gremmy from Oceanside and a good little surfer inspired by Phil. Thanks to Bruce, I got in on the action surfing a cameo sequence on a little wave at Miley Beach on the Makaha shore of Oahu, one of the most celebrated surf experiences of the day. Peter Johnson was with us, but I remember Phil and I having one of those rare experiences that all surfers live and dream about. A perfect surf session, nobody out, 75-degree water, blue sky, 2 to 3 foot glassy and slightly offshore tubes, with a 16mm camera on the beach filming every move we made. About 4 sets of perfect little lime green waves came through that either Phil or I were there to catch. It was kind of like a round robin. We worked off of each other like a game of tennis. Paddling out, I had a perfect view of Phil's one-stroke takeoff. With a left fade into a sweeping right turn stall right in the peak, he looked at me as if to say, "Watch this, kid." Then he put his hands behind his back and did a head dip as the wave broke. He disappeared for a second and came out and kicked out right in front of me. I was so stoked I stood up on my board and let out a scream so loud Diamond Head almost erupted. My turn. I paddled outside in time to do a no-stroke takeoff to a bottom turn, right in the middle of a beautiful little tube. Crouching down, I grabbed the rail, got covered up, and spit out right in front of Phil. Bruce released Surfing Holidays later that year. The Miley sequence was one of the highlights of the film, at least to me it was. Bruce showed the movie at local high schools and narrated it live over surf music playing on a tape recorder. Unfortunately, when the film debuted, the response was just average. This wasn't what Bruce expected at all. It really knocked him for a loop, and he stepped out of the norm and decided not to be a part of the Rat Pack. He just couldn't come back from Hawaii again like the other photographers with the same old boring footage, a bunch of nameless surfers on wave after wave. It was tough on him and Pat financially, but Bruce stopped filming completely. A year went by and Bruce hadn't come up with anything. He was very aware that the Dana Point crew held a mystique in the surfing world. That's why I lived there. Hobie, Severson, Surfer Magazine, everyone was waiting to see what would follow. Bruce knew he either had to show his old movies again or get out of town. Rumors flew immediately about the endless summer and who was going. I figured it was a no-brainer, me. My chances were better than most. I lived above Bruce's garage and he loved my enthusiasm. But then I heard there were others in line, Mike Haley, Diff, Phil. Bruce finally put the word out. He couldn't afford all the expenses involved with a trip this size. He said, if you can come up with the airfare, I'll pay for the rest, food, lodging. The game was on. The first two surfers who could pay for their plane ticket around the world would go on the endless summer. Chapter 5. The Hobie Heist. I made up my mind as I bolted over to Hobie's shop. If I didn't go on the endless summer, there was no way I was going to Vietnam. I planned on booking this place to get as far away from the draft as possible, but I wasn't going down easy. Nobody was taking my spot. When Bruce called a few months later, says Robert, I told him I still wanted to go to college, but he was insistent. I let him know I was going to Trestles the next day, so I said I'd stop by. As I walked into Bruce's office in Dana Point, he pointed to a map of the world that was laid out on his desk. Looking at all the marked countries that we'd visit, he explained that he didn't have any money for plane tickets, but that he'd pay me back afterwards from the movie showings. The only thing I could think of was that this trip was way more than just going to Baja or Hawaii. All the other little trips I'd been on were 2, maybe 3 weeks. I needed to talk to a few of my teachers and my mom and dad about this one. Are you out of your mind? My teacher said. You work your whole life, and when you're 70, you'll maybe get to go to Hawaii for a week. You can always go to school. Go! My parents said exactly the same thing. Just go. So I sold my car, Hap Jacobs gave me enough for a plane ticket, and I had a little pocket money for the trip. It was a ballsy thing to ask anybody for $1,400, especially Hobie Alter. But I was desperate. I was not going to Vietnam, and no way did I have that kind of cash laying around. I figured the worst thing that could happen was that Hobie would say no. Believe me, I wondered all the way over to the shop if he ever really forgave me for what I did to him a few years earlier. He must have. Why would he have hired me if he hadn't? Thinking back, I knew what I did to Hobie was wrong. And trust me, after I learned what kind of man he was, I felt horrible about the whole mess. But what's done was done. I couldn't change the past. It was 1959, and I'm not making excuses, but I didn't even know Hobie back then. Of course, I knew who he was. Anybody who surfed knew who Hobie was. I just hadn't actually met him yet. My whole world existed around South San Diego County, not Orange County. When I wasn't surfing, I mostly hung out with Billy Castor at Victoria Lane's bowling alley and pool hall up the street from Crystal Pier, a kind of second home for high school kids with fake IDs. Billy was a small guy. He had greased back hair, a leather jacket, and he surfed. I was shaping boards by then, Billy was patching, and we were good friends despite the fact that he lived in Mission Hills, the Ho-Daddy section of San Diego. Billy's Uncle Lloyd was this great big guy, and he and his wife Shirley were tandem partners on Hobie's team and members of the San Onofre Surf Club, one of the oldest and most respected clubs in California. Sano, as we called it, wasn't just a beach, it was a way of life. Members were allowed exclusive use by Camp Pendleton from 1952 to 1973 in exchange for a small annual fee and keeping the 2-mile stretch of beach clean. Boy, they had it made. Total control of a surf spot. There were private parties and picnics on the beach and no cops. There was no reason. They policed themselves. All of the San Onofre guys were classic. Hobie, Hoppy Schwartz, Doc Paskowitz, Whitey Harrison, and Heaves McClellan, just a gang of old-timers. They weren't ruthless like all the other surfers I knew. On the weekends, Billy and I would drive up to Santa with Uncle Lloyd and Aunt Shirley. We'd listen to the stories down at Old Man's or The Point. Then Uncle Lloyd would let us loose. We'd meet up with the Calhoun girls, Candy, Robin, and their mother Marge, and rip the place up. 2 hot dogs from down south. The Calhoun women had a whole California beach look going for them with their piercing blue eyes. I swear they just glowed. There were also very accomplished surfers. Marge won the Makaha International Surfing Championships in 1958. Her oldest daughter, Candy, was the West Coast Surfing Champion in 1963 and the first woman to body surf the Newport Wedge and Pipeline. I dated Robin for a while and spent a lot of time at their little white beach house on Glen Eyre in Laguna. Marge's boyfriend, Heaves McClellan, was this big, happy guy who owned a liquor store in town. Heaves was also the founder of the U.S. Surfing Association and the funniest man I ever met. I just remember him always laughing. One afternoon, Billy and Phil Castaneda stopped by Victoria Lanes after spending the day at Sano and taking a drive into Dana Point. "Michael, I just came back from Hobie's." Billy had a real squint in his eye, and I left the bathroom window open. Then he showed me a picture of Hobie's new boards and split. I just laughed. Billy was always planting the seed and trying to get me into all kinds of shit. Up till then, most of the trouble I got into was typical kid stuff, and always about getting my hands on some money. Stealing change people left out for the Sunday paper before the market opened, sifting through sand with small screens looking for lost coins, kind of a prehistoric metal detector. It didn't cover as much territory as fast, but it worked pretty good. Just for the hell of it, I also collected small shiny things that were easy to swipe, pens that glittered and locks that looked like they were worth money. I liked looking at them under the light and watching them sparkle. Another surefire way to put cash in your pocket was getting the $5 deposit back on a case of soda pops. Nobody gave the pop bottles away back then. They were like gold. My friends and I did almost anything to get our hands on them. We even made bamboo pole vaults so we could fly over our neighbors' fences after barbecues to collect trash cans full of bottles. Nobody saw us come, nobody saw us leave. We were shadows. Stealing surfboards definitely wasn't a kid's game. I really had to think about Castor's tip. This was some serious shit. It was winter, which meant it got dark early, but I didn't have a car. Man, this was rushed. It wasn't like I was stealing from a friend, I told myself. It'd be clean and quick and nobody'd get hurt. Painless. So I spent the next couple of hours sitting in Victoria Lanes trying to line up a ride. Tom the Towhead had a Pontiac Catalina two-door coupe. He was a real 50s hotshot with that baby. V8, 240 horsepower, stick. I swear he could take the parking lot and leave rubber. Tom was also the only guy around that night who owned a car. It didn't hurt either that Tom was blasted when I filled him in on the lowdown. I might have forgot to mention that we were going up there to steal surfboards from Hobie. It was more like, "You'll drive me to Dana Point? Cool. I'll buy the beer, you buy the gas." It took an hour to drive up the 2-lane El Camino Real. We pulled into Hobie's on PCH at 2 a.m. There wasn't anything on either side of the shop, but Hobie's sign was pretty bright. Didn't want the sheriff sniffing around, so we pulled behind the building and up against the bluff. When we walked around the side of Hobie's shop, it sounded like 1,000 crickets chirping. We found the open window Castor mentioned. It was small and up high and out of reach. Between Tom and me, I was the only one who could fit. I climbed on top of a box I found behind the shop, shimmied up the side of the building, and slipped inside while Tom stood watch. "I'll be right back," I said, before I disappeared inside. Boy, did he look confused. Inside the shop, I swear it was pitch black. I tried hard not to knock anything over. There was no way I was going to take a chance on turning on the bathroom light, though. Just my luck, a cop would drive by. Groping my way up the front of the shop, I waited for my eyes to adjust. Man, what a score! There were racks full of Hobie's brand new foam surfboards in the showroom, different sizes and colors, all ready to surf. I heard Hobie and Grubby Clark partnered up and went undercover on a foam manufacturing project in Laguna Canyon. One by one, I laid each surfboard down very carefully on the shop floor and measured them out. Even though I was stealing Hobie's boards, I gained a new respect for him and his talent as I looked at the quality he put into each one. I didn't want to screw anything up. "Henson, let's go," I heard Tom whisper loudly outside the bathroom window. You could tell he just wanted to get the hell out of there. I don't know how long I'd been inside, but it must have been a while. Tom definitely had more than enough time to let this whole heist thing sink in. Tom pulled the Pontiac closer to the shop and was waiting for me when the back door flew open. Rushing to get out of there, we removed the back seat, which left 2 metal bars separating it from the trunk, and tried to stuff the boards in each of the 3 diamond-shaped holes. But they were too long, 9 and 10 feet with glassed-on fins. We couldn't give up now. We'd come too far. Pushing and shoving, we stacked them up until we wedged all the boards in nose first. How we got away with it still amazes me. We hit the road at 4 in the morning with 10 surfboards looking like logs sticking out of the tied-down trunk, and cruised along PCH going 50 miles an hour. The sun was just about to come up by the time we got home. We had to act fast. I slipped a couple of boards out back at the pool hall. We unloaded 2 in a friend's garage. Tom kept 1, and he dropped me off at Crystal Pier with a 5-board stash. It was tight, man. I only had about 45 minutes to crawl under the back of the pier and bury the boards where I thought they wouldn't be disturbed. The sun rose just as I finished covering up my hidden quiver. Monday morning, everything at Mission Bay High School was pretty normal until I got called into the principal's office. I didn't think much about it. Once the Santa Ana started blowing, I was always in trouble for ditching. I'd get so distracted when the flags wailed, I'd end up skipping class. Waking up early to check out gunners before school, I was obsessed and figured showing up late for second or third period was the same punishment as missing homeroom, so I kept catching just one more wave. After a while, it got way too easy to say, no school today, completely. Hell, school would still be there tomorrow. The surf was here now. The rush of catching waves far outweighed the guilt and denial. When it came time to get back into school, I'd forge my mother's name on a tardy slip using the lame excuse that I had a doctor or dentist appointment. I had so many tardies and absences it didn't matter anymore, and all because of the surfing bug. Walking up to the school office, I honestly thought I got caught for ditching. I didn't realize what was really going down until I saw the 2 detectives from the San Diego Police Department sitting across from the principal. The heat was on, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I didn't even argue. I just held up my arms, the cuffs were slapped on, and I was hauled off to jail and thrown into a cold, dark cell at county. Because I was a minor and only 17, my parents got the dreaded call as soon as I was booked. They decided if I was old enough to do something so irresponsible, I was old enough to learn a lesson, and they left me there to rot. 5 a.m. Stand in line for chow cornflakes, oatmeal slop. 1 hour a day outside. It wasn't good policy to get involved with other inmates. The rest of the day and night, you'd lay in your bunk and read or sleep. The only good thing about county is you never get settled. You're either processed right away or at least within 72 hours. Sitting in the slammer for a few days, I heard it all came down when Tom's mother saw a brand new surfboard sitting up against the fence the next morning while she was washing the breakfast dishes. Tom's mother could be heard blocks away when she was pissed. She'd go ballistic. 4 days later, I still had no idea when I was getting out. News also traveled fast on the outside. It didn't take long for the whole coast from San Diego to Ventura County to hear about the robbery. I was surfing mostly Swamis back then. I wasn't an accepted member of Swami's Surfing Society in Encinitas, a cool group of guys and good surfers, but I had a few friends in the club. Everybody heard what happened, so I couldn't believe it when nobody offered to help get me out, not even Castor, and it was all his idea. Linda Benson was a member of Swami's. She was a hot 15-year-old surfer who was sponsored by Hobie. This little squirt made her first mark by winning the Women's Makaha International earlier that year. I didn't know much about her except that she was a nice kid. I did know that she would make it to the top, but like I said, we weren't really close. That's why it surprised the hell out of me when I heard she begged Hobie to release me. I felt sorry for Mike when I heard he was in jail for stealing Hobie's boards, recalls Linda Benson. I just thought that surfing in the late 50s, early 60s was such a new era. Our small surfing community was more like a family, and Mike was part of that. I also admired Mike because he was a really good surfer. You could just tell by watching him out in the water. The good ones had it in their blood. Mike, L.J. Richards, Skip Fry, and Phil Edwards, they just kept getting better. When I heard that her brother was in jail, I had to do something to help. At first, Hobie was really mad. Come on, Hobie, he's been in jail for 10 days, and I'm sure he's sorry for what he did. I pleaded Mike's case. Hobie just kind of laughed like I had to be kidding. Then, for some reason, he cooled down, did the right thing, and dropped the charges when Mike promised to return the boards. I did steal Hobie's boards, but when you've got this cute little 15-year-old staring up at you with sad eyes, what's a guy going to do? He never had any idea how many boards were actually stolen. 6, I think, were returned, including Tom's. I didn't physically dig them up, I just told the cops where to find them. Damn, I was glad to return those fuckers. 3 years after the Hobie incident, I still regretted what I did, just not enough to stop from asking Hobie for the money for a plane ticket. I was banking on it, in fact, that all was forgotten. Luckily, Hobie thought it was an opportunity of a lifetime for any red-blooded American surfer. Plus, he was good friends with Bruce, and I knew that he thought the endless summer trip was a great idea. To me, it was necessary that I go. The thought of getting my ass shot off in Vietnam was not something I was looking forward to. I wound up promising Hobie the world if he would just loan me the dough. I don't know if it was my enthusiasm or just a reminder of what a great guy Hobie was, but he couldn't resist my offer. We worked out a gentleman's agreement where I would either shape boards for him when I got home or flat out pay him back. Because of his generosity, I was going to spend the next 3 months surfing instead of on the run. Chapter 6. Africa, the First Leg. We barely had time to get our feet wet on our first stops in Africa. We were a few days in Senegal, the same with Ghana. Bruce's $50,000 budget didn't allow us to hang in one place too long. Our main destination from the beginning of the trip was Cape Town, South Africa. It took us a week to fly the 2,000 miles down the west coast and across the continent. Talk about extremes. We went from Ghana, where we taught a chief and his villagers how to surf, to a full-on political revolution in Nairobi, Kenya. Then 24 hours later, we found ourselves standing 800 feet above a rocky beach at the Cape of Good Hope, smack dab in between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Did you know you can get from one side of the country to the other in Cape Town in about an hour, and that there is a 10 degrees difference in temperature where the two oceans collide? The cold currents on the west coast that come up from the Antarctic merge with the tropical currents coming down from the equator on the east coast. There were also some gnarly winds standing on the edge of that cliff. Must have been 30, 40 miles an hour. They blew us all to shit. When Bruce wanted to film the two of us standing together, I could tell Robert was nervous about getting too near the edge. So I started inching my way closer just to freak him out. I think he thought the wind was going to blow him over into the drink. You can't blame the guy for being scared. Shit, trying to navigate a surfboard in these icy waters would send you off on a jet stream bound for Europe. I sure didn't want to imagine that. So far, Cape Town was the highlight of our trip. There were hotels, tall buildings, and even car dealerships. The South Africans themselves were very proud people. Taking as much pride in their country as we do in America, they descended from British and Dutch settlers and arrived about the same time the Pilgrims came to Plymouth Rock. I made the mistake of asking a few locals if they were English or Dutch. I was immediately corrected. They weren't either. They were South African. Coming from the U.S. and the Civil Rights Movement, we all had a problem with apartheid. The government's defense was that they took care of the blacks and didn't mess with the way they lived. If they wanted to work in town, they could. They were paid a fair wage, plus there was free medical for everyone. They just had certain rules to live by, one of them being that they had to be off the streets and back in their homes by sundown. I guess the South African government felt they were doing the right thing. John Whitmore was our contact in Cape Town. John was a strong, tan, middle-aged guy, at least 30, with a crew cut. He was the dude Metz made surfboards with 4 years before. John was also the VW distributor for the entire country and the only surfboard manufacturer in Cape Town. He was so popular with the local surfers who were hungry for any information about surfing that he could have been mayor. We figured this out when he met us at the airport with a motorcade of VW bugs double stacked with surfboards. John was also our ambassador. He took us into his home and hooked us up to crash with friends. We never stayed in a hotel once in Cape Town. He also lined up surf spots and gave us a tour of every decent swell around. The South African surfers were really curious about our boards, so wherever we went, they'd hear about it ahead of time and show up just to watch. If it wasn't happening right away, the four of us in a convoy of V-dubs would cruise down the two-lane country roads, passing elephants and zebras on our way to the beach. Baboons were the most difficult to get around. They were known to throw rocks and jump on cars, backing up traffic 100 yards or so. No problem, we'd just take a detour through the bush. On November 22, 1963, we were at a party in Cape Town and listening to music on the radio when we heard the news that President Kennedy had been assassinated. Television hadn't gotten to South Africa yet, so what little information was got was sketchy. First, the DJ said that Kennedy was dead. 20 minutes later, another news flash reported that he was shot, but supposedly okay. Then the reporter came back a third time and said the first report turned out to be true. We didn't know anything about shots being fired from a school book depository, Lee Harvey Oswald, or the grassy knoll. We only heard that President Kennedy was shot in the back of the head and that he didn't make it. We kept hoping it was just a rumor. The first thing I thought was I got a call home, remembers Robert. But you couldn't make an international phone call back then. There were only so many lines, so there was no communication except what we heard on that radio. I kept thinking, what's going to happen? There was nobody to talk to. There was no news. I was pretty worried about it. Like, okay, our vice president's a cowboy. I mean, what's he all about? I didn't know a thing about him. I was pretty concerned for about 3 days. We were all feeling far from home when Kennedy was assassinated. Absolutely nothing was going to take that feeling away. Well, except maybe time. I definitely needed some space away from all the craziness, which was exactly why I brought along my stash. Whenever I got the chance to wander off by myself, I looked around for marijuana and mushrooms. I even walked into some of the smaller villages asking about a common route that a cab driver told me about. He said it'd get you really loaded, blow your mind, and keep you awake for weeks. All I needed to know about that black-seeded bush was that it kept your eyes open, and I was on it. Unfortunately, nothing's as good as it seems. The locals who'd been chewing it for years all had red lips and bleeding gums. I also couldn't get past the sour taste, and it was hard to chew, worse than tar. God should grow that shit with a disclaimer. Bruce and Robert didn't have a clue where I went when I disappeared downwind. At least they didn't say anything if they did. I actually respected the fact that neither of them did drugs. They would not have been cool with it if they knew. So it was a good idea to keep them in the dark. I never thought I was holding them up. I was a loner. That's just what I did. When I went off exploring, it was usually when I was at my breaking point and had to get away to keep my sanity. Before I even left home, I decided I'd need some smoke for moments of confusion, stress, the general boredom of traveling, and a roll of bennies to keep alert. Whenever I was tripped out on the herb, I played it off by drinking them down. If you know anything about drugs, some keep you from getting drunk, others help you drink people under the table. Take my advice. Never trust a woman who drinks more than you. She's probably got diet pills stashed in her purse. I swear, our stay in Cape Town was non-stop. John Whitmore introduced us to so many people I couldn't keep up. I'd forget their names 5 minutes later. Terence Bullen was one of the few who stood out. Terence was a retired British soldier, a real personality around town who spoke 7 or 8 native languages. He was so weathered from the sun you couldn't tell if he was 30 or 50 years old. He was also a big game hunter who captured African animals for zoos and also did work for the game preserves. Terence was the 60s version of the crocodile hunter. Right around the same time that we had met Terence, says Robert, Bruce was thinking about buying a car to drive up to Durban. Nobody had ever driven the entire eastern coastline of South Africa before. Bruce really wanted to explore for surf. There were about 8 to 10 guys up in Durban who had just barely learned. They weren't thinking about surf trips. They were more focused on staying up on their boards. So Bruce and Terence made a deal. Terence would drive us up to Durban if we let his 14-year-old nephew James come along. In return, Bruce paid for their expenses and the kid learned how to surf. With the map Whitmore gave us leading to a 7-mile point called Cape St. Francis, we hit the road in Terence's beat-up 2-seater panel truck with wild game animals painted on the side. If we came across a dirt road, we'd drive towards the coast to check out the waves. If there weren't any waves, we'd go back to the highway and head north. When we came to a cliff, same thing, go back to the highway and keep going. That doesn't mean nothing happened unless we found surf. Bruce was ready for any opportunity. When we saw how huge the sunsets were in South Africa, it felt like we were closer to the sun than at home. Driving on flat land affects the horizon and causes a shiny, water-like effect, like a mirage. It happens all the time in India. So Bruce stayed behind and filmed Terence driving inland. It turned out to be one of the many great pieces of footage in the film. Bruce's ideas didn't always make sense. Getting a shot of me sitting in the passenger seat of the panel truck holding a transistor radio up to my ear was a good one. I just laughed. First off, the radio didn't have any batteries, and second, there weren't any radio stations in the African bush. Terence had his own way of livening things up. He was an expert when it came to no-legged creatures, having made his living milking venom from cobras for research. His love for snakes and a very strange sense of humor made for a deadly combination. Driving up the coastline, Robert and I were asleep in the back of the truck. All of a sudden, Terence slammed on the brakes when he saw a snake in the road. He jumped out of the truck, grabbed it, then opened up the back and threw the snake in. I swear he scared the shit out of us. Robert leapt over to the front seat and I dove out the back onto the pavement. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. Bruce was pissed. Terrence didn't particularly like Bruce anyway. He saw him as an American Navy man, which he was, who was always talking about surfing but spent most of his time on the beach filming. When Bruce told Terrence that throwing the snake in the truck wasn't cool, Terrence replied, "It's just a snake. He's more scared than you are." One of Terrence's favorite tricks was to pull you into conversation, get you laughing, then toss one of his pet snakes at your feet and split. Talk about scared shitless. Terrence had been bitten 5 times by cobras and even lost a finger to one, which he kept pickled in a jar. When you weren't watching, he'd slip it into your cup of tea. "What's my finger doing in there?" he'd yell and pull out his stump. Bruce and Robert didn't get Terrence's sense of humor at all. I wasn't crazy about finding snakes stuffed in my sleeping bag either, but the 5 of us together constantly was really getting on my nerves, and fucking Robert. Now I'll admit it, I can be a real pain in the ass if I want to. I know that, and I'm sure it was more my fault than Robert's, but a few days after we landed in Cape Town, I started seeing that he was from a different breed. What did I expect? All those North County surfers were manic. Plus, from the start, Bruce and Robert had their own little fan club going. It was more in my nature to bounce in from the side and disrupt things. All I know is he was starting to piss me off about everything. Terrence's tricks gave me just the excuse I was looking for to stir things up. I figured it's better to know what the other guy's thinking than to have the plan turn on you. I really didn't have a choice, now did I? My 21-year-old heart might not have been able to take the next surprise. So running front man through the camp for Terrence once in a while, we dropped snakes, whoosh, and we were gone laughing our asses off. Every day it was an adventure, says Robert. We were never just sitting around stagnant. There was a lot of time in the car going from one place to another and the anticipation of getting there. What's going to happen on the way? When are we going to surf? Eat? Shit. I'm getting hungry. It was always something. Driving 3 days straight was a grind. We had 1,200 miles to cover before we reached Cape St. Francis, and the 5 of us in our gear were crammed in tight in the back of Terrence's 2-seater truck. Mile after mile, we didn't really have a view, so we slept a lot. To top it off, Robert picked up a gnarly case of diarrhea all the way back in Senegal. Even I couldn't get on his case about that. I left the poor guy alone to suffer in his misery. When you're hungry, you'll eat anything, says Robert. I think we had a guinea pig in Ghana. Somebody told us it was just meat with spices on it. It didn't taste like anything strange, stringy chicken maybe. Whatever it was, I got a major case of diarrhea for at least a couple months. Jeez, it was so bad I could eat forever and not get full. It just went straight through me and cost Bruce a fortune. Then one day, it went away. We hit the outskirts of a small village in the middle of the 3rd night on the road and paid $4 each to sleep over in rondevals or grass huts. We were stiff, beat up, ready to pass out, and all glad to get away from each other. I woke up at dawn the next morning. You don't even know how good it felt to finally sleep in a bed. Crammed together in the back of Terrence's panel truck got old real fast. I felt even better when I realized we reached our destination, Cape St. Francis. Hustling down to the water, I started the day off with a good old puff of Mexican ragweed. Thanks to my friend Bobby Updegrave and his connections in Tijuana, I had enough pot to last me 3 months. Bobby was one smooth and dapper little Chicano, and the older brother of my very first girlfriend, Sharon. Eventually, she and I broke up. It was bound to happen. We were only 11 and 12, but my friendship with Bobby lasted for years, and as usual, he came through with some smoke and uppers for the endless summer trip. Funny thing was, the pot Bobby sold me wasn't that good. Turned out it didn't matter, though. Dope smoked on the other side of the world is so much stronger. One puff and bang, it spun me. The tide down at Cape St. Francis early that morning was high, and 1 to 2 foot. A slight offshore beach break appeared with little left tubes breaking toward the shore. The sandbar looked like a typical day at Newport where Robert surfed every day of his life. Just my luck. The kid who never surfed anything bigger than 5 feet was completely within his comfort zone 10,000 miles away from home. It wasn't anything like I expected, though. I fired up my Tom Thumb pipe again and was just about to lay back and get into my early morning high when I noticed that the tide was going out. The sun was in my face and the wind was changing direction, possible blown-out conditions. Our trip hadn't produced any good surf to speak of so far, but anything was better than nothing. So I jumped up to drag Robert and Bruce down the beach to do what we came for, get some surfing footage in the can. I swear, it was like waking the dead. Nobody budged. I did everything except jump up and down and yell at them to get their asses down the beach. I got nothing. I was so pissed off I left and sat down with a bunch of village women dressed in colorful robes and watched them bake bread. One thing about South Africa, the tides run 14 to 15 feet high and low, compared to California and Hawaii's 4 to 5 foot range. I couldn't believe it. In the short time I was gone, the whole beach changed. The tide was dropping fast and it looked like 50 yards of sand appeared. The wind blew in another direction, the glare was in my face, and it looked almost hopeless. Then, out of my right eye, I saw a wave lapping on shore at the point. Nothing surfable, but the wind was offshore. Any other day I would have jumped into the water at daybreak, surfed my brains out, and talked story about all the good waves everyone missed. But this wasn't a pleasure trip. We were here to get as much surfing on film as possible. So far, nothing was worth writing home about. Back at camp, Terrence woke up first, hungover from all the driving. The trip took its toll on everybody in one way or another. I swear, Bruce and Robert didn't move an inch. I poked, nudged, yelled. I did everything except shake the shit out of them to get them up and down to the beach. A snake prank would have budged them, but Terrence wasn't in the mood, and I didn't really want to go there. Terrence helped me get the blokes up, but by the time we got down to the beach, it changed again. Bruce looked at me like, "What the fuck are you smoking?" I was pretty sure he didn't know anything about my stash. Even when we lived together in Hawaii, I'd come in after smoking a Primo Bud and start rambling on about nothing, and he never caught on once. By now, the tide was so low the surf was gone. The four of us sat on the beach and smoked a quarter pack of cigarettes. We had no other choice but to come up with a plan. Might as well get the show on the road. I looked at the point again. That little wave lapping on the shoreline was starting to take shape. Right in front of us, the tide came in and the sandbars started producing little peaks. When the left started to form, Robert ran back up to the panel truck to get his board. I checked the point a third time. The amazing wave started to form itself. Bruce and I weren't really on good terms that morning, probably because I woke him up early. Every time I got his attention, the wave disappeared. Things were getting intense. Robert was pacing now and ready to paddle out, but he couldn't. He had to wait for me to wax up and get stoked. While Bruce was getting his camera gear set up, the tide was on the move in. More waves started breaking in front of us. Everyone was ready except me. I caught another glimpse of the right break up at the point. I swear it was a little Malibu, but Bruce missed it again. What the hell was going on? It wasn't his fault, or maybe it was. The final straw came when Bruce got frustrated and said something that really pissed me off. You know, I can't even remember what it was now, probably something sarcastic, because I blew up like someone blindsided me. I think I even surprised myself. "You couldn't really see the waves up at the point," says Robert. "It looked like whitewater hitting the rocks." You know what, Bruce? Fuck you and your fucking movie. I let him have it with both barrels. I just didn't care anymore. You can take your camera and Robert and stick them both up your ass. I was so tired of those two clowns, I grabbed my board and stormed off. It took me 5 minutes to get to the point. I walked along the shoreline and the incoming tide was heading in. Every little lap, a surge of the tide. The closer I got, these 2 and 3 foot sets began forming a sandbar right into a cove and the waves started breaking outside. Every set became more pronounced. A set of 4 perfect waves went ripping down the point with nobody riding them. I was so excited I was crying, I was laughing, I was scared. I was all by myself, about ready to put my white-ass body to the test, entering uncharted waters. We knew there were sharks cruising along the surf. We saw them almost every day. But another set was on its way, and the sheer mindset of wave versus man blinded me to jump in and glide into the lineup. I let the first 2 waves pass as I aligned myself for the third. I figured after watching the backsides pour down the coast, I'd catch the next wave. I'd ride as far as I could, kick out, and paddle my ass off to catch the 4th wave and ride it all the way down the beach. From my perspective, I couldn't see the end. All I could see was Robert down the beach, knee-deep in water, holding the nose of his board under his arm and looking my way as Bruce, Terrence, and the kids stood along the water's edge. I gracefully entered another wave with all the world watching. This was the biggest I saw that day. As I paddled into the lineup, a shoulder-high wave faced me. I turned around, did a no-stroke takeoff, and slightly faded left, and did a top turn into a feathering wall of water that started to tube over me. The rails trimmed in perfection down the line, and an unadulterated warm surge of adrenaline came over my body and mind. I was so exuberated. If there was ever a state of mind where God and man were one with nature, this was the experience. Racing across the face, a bolt of energy hit me and I screamed my lungs out while the gang ran down the beach like racehorses. Robert dragged his board by the nose, Bruce had his camera and tripod in tow, and Terrence and James carried the rest of the gear. I haven't had too many adrenaline rushes like that in my life. A pure and natural phenomenon. It was electrical. The hair on my neck stood straight up while another three-wave set was behind me. I realized if I didn't kick out soon, I'd need a taxi to get back. When the crew finally reached the point, Robert paddled out and Bruce stood on the beach and put the camera on the tripod. I swear he didn't budge an inch. Terrence handed him one cartridge after another while he filmed. Terrence had to do something useful. He wasn't about to get wet. I thought it was classic. He could milk venom from poisonous cobras or trap a rhino, but he was scared to death of the ocean. The tide was really rising now. You could tell it was going to fade out sooner rather than later. The surf started backing off just about the same time Robert lost his board. I turned around and rode it in to force Bruce out there. He really needed to experience the feeling of real surfing. When I reached the shore, I took over the camera and filmed him, the goofy-footed kook surfing and Robert swimming in. We were just paddling in circles, riding waves until the tide finally got so high it went completely flat, says Robert. I don't remember having breakfast or anything that morning, and I was so darn tired and excited, I remember vomiting. The whole thing lasted about 40 minutes, but I was alone in that perfect setting for at least 10 or 15. Bruce shot 6 rolls of film and the sequence was perfect. It was the best footage of the entire trip, a definite turning point in the direction of the movie. Finding the perfect wave. Funny thing about those 14-foot tide changes in South Africa, they were so extreme that the rising water crept up as fast as we walked the tide to the cliffs until there was no beach at all. The next morning, Cape St. Francis was so blown out and choppy, you couldn't tell where anything was from the day before. Chapter 7. Leg 2. I'm still amazed we got out of India with those 3-inch cartridges of film. Luck definitely had something to do with it. Well, that and the warning that we got back in Durban. Even though Bruce knew that the film was loaded with lots of energy, he still wanted to explore the coastline for surf, hoping to find anything remotely close to being as good as what we just left. We all knew that lightning wasn't going to strike twice, though, and boy, were we ever right. Compared to Cape St. Francis, the waves we found on our way up to Durban sucked, and our $50,000 budget surf flick started looking more like an amateur home movie. Depressing. I mean, we could have stayed at Cape St. Francis for a week or two riding the perfect wave. How much better does it get than that? But the further we drove away from the 7-mile stretch, the more we doubted if we'd ever find anything else as radical as what we had left behind. The footage Bruce shot before Cape St. Francis was immediately mailed back to his studio to be developed. Then his crew would send copies ahead on our journey so that we could review it. Bruce wasn't about to airmail these reels off to anybody. This footage was way too hot. He even suggested, "Hey guys, why don't I hop on a plane tonight for the States and catch you in Australia?" Sure, Bruce. Fortunately, he came to his senses when he figured out that the change in reservations would cost him $50. We were definitely on a schedule, says Robert. Not a lot of time to just hang out. There were people waiting for us in Durban. Then we had to get to Johannesburg to catch our flight a few days later. There weren't that many flights going in and out of Africa in those days, and we had to make our connections, Arabia, India, Ceylon, and Singapore, just to get to Australia. We didn't have a choice. That's the way traffic went, and if we didn't catch our plane, it would have been 3 or 4 days until the next one. There was no way we were going to get stranded. Our 3-day layover in Durban wasn't all that bad. John Whitmore made a few phone calls to let friends know we were coming, and by the time we showed our faces, there were enough activities to keep us in the country for the next 6 months. Dinners, parties, and night surfing during full moon in the Indian Ocean. The moon in Durban was so bright a couple dozen of us went out at 4 o'clock in the morning. South African surfers did everything in packs. I guess it gave them an advantage over the sharks. You'd think we'd be all stoked flying out of India, but no way. Things just weren't the same after our narrow escape. The mood changed drastically. Trust me, I was relieved everything worked out, but the hassles with customs really took the wind out of Bruce's sails. The energy of discovery was gone and the trip was basically over for him. He wasn't enthusiastic about anything after that. All Bruce wanted to do was edit the film. Luckily, he bit the bullet and got over his urge to split. He knew he needed to follow the original plan, but to be on the safe side, he spent the rest of the trip sleeping with the Cape St. Francis reels. We hit Ocean Beach on the west coast of Australia and drove a rental car for 4 short days looking for surf. After filming Cape St. Francis, the flat surf just didn't fit the story we were trying to tell, so we changed plans and headed for Melbourne on the other side of the continent. Aside from meeting some of the locals, absolutely nothing about Australia was worth mentioning. End of story. We had no reason to stick around. One day we were in the land of Oz, the next we were on a plane headed for New Zealand. New Zealand was beautiful, not that Australia wasn't, but the whole country looked like a golf course, all manicured and clean. Too bad I didn't have my clubs with me. It's actually a lot like the California coastline with all of its coves and bays, except that the water was way too cold. Just like Cape Town, it was freezing. I think we were all chomping at the bit to go home by the time we landed in Tahiti. I know I was. We couldn't really complain, though. I mean, we're talking Tahiti. We played up the whole tourist scene, renting bicycles and cruising along black and white sand beaches and checking out waterfalls in the rainforest. The Tahitians also made us feel really welcome. Young girls would actually come up and kiss us for no reason whenever we stopped on our bikes. Then they'd run off giggling. You can't beat that. The longer the trip went on, though, the more I needed space away from Bruce and Robert. I had some major crap to deal with when I got home, like the draft. All I wanted to do was get back to the islands. The morning we took off for Hawaii, I went for a walk on the beach to watch the sunrise. I smoked a joint and was feeling pretty mellow cruising along a breaker wall. I never expected to see anybody else up that early. I definitely did a double take when I saw the young Tahitian girl sitting alone in one of the grass shacks lined up on the sand. She was so exotic, probably only about 17, and combing her long black silky hair. I couldn't stop watching her. I was hypnotized. As I got closer to the hut, she kept looking up at me, kind of shy and smiling. Just as quickly, she'd look away. We flirted back and forth a few more times. I didn't expect anything but a nice hello. But when I passed by her hut, she motioned for me to come inside. As soon as I stepped onto the grass mat, she kissed both my cheeks very gently, took my hand, and led me in. I couldn't believe it. I probably had the shittiest grin on my face. 2 hours later, I woke up alone, stretched out on her feather-stuffed mattress overlooking the ocean. The sun was beating on my back, and I lifted my head to watch the waves lap on shore, savoring the moment. I made it back to the hotel just in time to leave for the airport. I tried to tell Bruce and Robert what happened, but Robert got all pissed off. He didn't believe me. Sore loser. He was probably mad that I hooked up with a girl and he didn't. Or had I? I made sure I was the first aboard the plane in Papeete, Tahiti. This was our final flight back to the good old USA. Every flight I tried for the window seat. Even today on the road, I always call shotgun and win. But flying around the world together for the last 3 months, I was sick of Robert, Bruce was distant, and I needed a distraction for the long flight home. We were not communicating, except to say, "Hey, move over, I gotta take a piss." We didn't talk much at all. We knew we had the best surf footage in the can, and finishing the movie was the only thing left that was important to any of us. I sat next to Robert, pushed my forehead against the airplane window, and daydreamed about Tahitian girls and the perfect waves at Cape St. Francis. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us again next week as we continue reading from Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel. Until then, keep your toes on the nose, your bottom turns tight, and your stoke high. I'll see you in the lineup. Donna Clausen-Jost is an American author and publisher whose literary journey began in 1997 with the release of a marketing guide for artists. In the process, she discovered a passion for writing that has since become both her creative outlet and personal therapy. Her most notable work is Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel, co-authored with legendary surfer Michael Lear Hinson. In the course of bringing this book to life, Jost founded Endless Dreams Publishing, gaining hands-on experience in writing, editing, layout, and book marketing. She recently published My Brush with Hendrix, the story of her artist husband, Lance Jost's experience painting a 100-foot-long mural in Jimi Hendrix's Electric Lady recording studio in Greenwich Village. Residing in South Orange County, California, she continues to write and inspire others through her storytelling.